15th of September 1938. Neville Chamberlain meets Adolf Hitler. On the 15th of September 1938, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany to try personally to persuade Adolf Hitler not to carry out his threats against Czechoslovakia. After prolonged negotiations in Munich, both Chamberlain and the French Premier, Edouard Daladier, were delicately suggesting to the Czechs that maybe Hitler's proposals were not as unacceptable as had first appeared. Chamberlain went as far as to state on his return to London, "Herr Hitler is a gentleman." Chamberlain was back in Germany a few days later, on the 22nd, for further talks on the European predicament, talks that eventually led to the Munich Agreement. 28th of September 1938, the Munich Conference. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and the French Premier Edouard Daladier had initially met Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini on the 15th of December 1938 to discuss, amongst other things, Germany's claim on the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. They all returned and agreed on the Munich Pact on the 28th of September and signed the document the following day. The pact was one of appeasement. It was agreed that the Sudetenland should be ceded to Germany in return for Hitler's promise not to claim any other territory. Within a few short months, the Munich Pact was in tatters and became a symbol of the dangers of appeasement. 15th of March 1939. Germany occupies the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Peace in our time had been Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's claim when he returned from Germany, where he had agreed the Munich Pact with Adolf Hitler. Under this agreement, the Sudetenland and its 3.5 million ethnic Germans were annexed into Germany, who in turn promised not to take further Czech territory. But the pact proved to be more about appeasement than peace. On the 15th of March 1939, German troops moved forward from the Sudetenland, first to Prague and then into the whole of Bohemia and Moravia. Hitler proclaimed, "Czechoslovakia has ceased to exist," and Chamberlain was left complaining that Herr Hitler had broken his word. The 3rd of April 1939. Hitler gives the order to prepare Plan Weiss, the attack on Poland. The Munich Pact, signed by Hitler, Mussolini, and Chamberlain, was in tatters when Hitler ordered his troops to invade Czechoslovakia on the 15th of March 1939. The German leader had clearly shown his intentions of expansion in Europe. There was little doubt in the spring of 1939 that Germany's next target was Poland. In fact, Hitler gave the order to prepare Fall Weiss. France and England negotiated frantically, trying to form some cohesive alliance against the forces of the fascist dictatorship. A clear manifestation of Britain's concern was the introduction of conscription of men aged 21 and 22. The 7th of April 1939. Mussolini occupies Albania. The self-proclaimed King of Albania, King Zog I, had entered into a political and military alliance with fascist Italy, and subsequent heavy economic dependency on Italy, in turn, led to Italian interference in Albanian domestic and foreign affairs. It soon became clear that Albania was threatened. After the Munich Pact of 1938, Hitler and Mussolini signed a military assistance pact the year after. When Germany then seized Bohemia and Moravia, the Italians annexed Albania. Italian troops entered the country on the 7th of April 1939, and King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy was immediately declared King of Albania. 22nd of May 1939. Steel Treaty signed between Germany and Italy. The diplomatic activities leading up to the Second World War can at best be described as unusual. In March 1936, Germany reoccupied the Rhineland, clearly against the Versailles Treaty. 2 years later, Germany annexes Austria, and later that year, in September, during the Munich Conference, England, France, and Italy accept Germany's right to the Sudetenland and recommend that Czechoslovakia cede the territory in exchange for guaranteed peace. And Germany attacks Czechoslovakia in March the following year. And finally, on the 22nd of May 1939, the Pact of Steel is signed between Italy and Germany. The 31st of May 1939. Germany signs a non-aggression treaty with Denmark. It does appear in retrospect that Adolf Hitler and the German government used diplomacy for their own tactical purposes and viewed treaties as temporary means to further their own objectives. The list of broken agreements and treaties is long, and the Versailles Treaty, the Munich Pact, and the Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union are just a few examples. Hitler's speech in the Reichstag guaranteed the neutrality of several countries. Then, on the 31st of May, 1939, Denmark signs a non-aggression treaty with Germany that was to be broken within 12 months. 23rd of August, 1939. Germany signs non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union. Though Adolf Hitler claimed that he did not have any further territorial claims after the annexation of the Czech Sudetenland, there is little doubt that plans for additional expansion were well advanced by mid-1939, and Poland was the obvious first target. Germany wasn't yet ready to confront the USSR, and their foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop negotiated a non-aggression pact with his Soviet counterpart, Molotov. The treaty was signed on the 23rd of August, 1939, and in it the two countries secretly divided up Poland between them, making way for the German attack only a few days later. 1st of September 1939. Germany invades Poland. Adolf Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland on the 31st of August 1939, and at 4:45 on the morning of 1st of September, bombers and fighters of the Luftwaffe crossed the Polish frontier and thereby effectively started the Second World War, as both France and Great Britain had guaranteed Polish sovereignty. The Munich Pact notwithstanding, Europe was at war, and a short hour after the Luftwaffe had struck, the German Army Group South, commanded by General von Rundstedt, smashed their way forward, aiming for Lodz, Krakow, and obviously Warsaw. This was the first time the world witnessed blitzkrieg. 8th of September 1939. German troops close on Warsaw. When German bombers on the morning of 1st of September 39 hit the Polish railroads, the country's mobilization was hopelessly snarled up, and within a few days, two German army groups had broken through on two narrow fronts, sending armored spearheads on fast drives towards Brest and the capital, Warsaw. The German tactic was a base lesson in blitzkrieg, the use of armor, mobile infantry, and air power in pincer movements that encircled the enemy. By the 8th of September, the German forces had closed in on Warsaw, and the Polish army west of the city was now entrapped, and Poland was, to all intents and purposes, defeated. 10th of September 1939. All Commonwealth dominions, except Ireland, declare war on Germany. By the evening of 3rd of September 1939, both Great Britain and France had declared war on Germany. Following the invasion of Poland, many other countries followed suit the same day. On the 10th of September, all Commonwealth dominions except Ireland had officially declared war on Germany. What followed was a period of military inactivity referred to as the Phony War. No actions were taken against German forces by the Allies, except at sea, until the following year, when Germany started the next stage on its expansion program and invaded Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, and France. 17th of September 1939. Soviet forces attacked Poland. After the German onslaught on Poland, there was only a small fraction of the Polish army in the east of the country that had any hope of escape. But on the 17th of September 1939, that hope was also dashed as the Red Army attacked the hard-tried country. The non-aggression treaty between Germany and the Soviet Union had, amongst other things, made provision for a division of Poland which would then cease to exist as a nation. Hardly surprisingly, the Soviet forces did not encounter significant opposition, but they had recreated a frontier that historically had been a source of friction and animosity for centuries. 19th of September 1939. Mazchek's Black Brigade is ordered to cross the border into Hungary. The Red Army's invasion of Poland from the east and the German blitzkrieg attack from the west had all but put paid to the Polish forces, though part of the capital Warsaw was still holding out. In less than 3 weeks, Poland was on the brink of a collapse, brought on by fast-moving panzers and screaming dive bombers, and the only coherent resistance left was Colonel Mazchek's Black Brigade, still fighting close to the Carpathian Mountains in the south of the country. On 19th of September 1939, Mazchek was, however, ordered to take his brigade across the mountains and into Hungary to hopefully save them for future use against the enemy. 22nd of September 1939. Red Army occupies Low. Soviet forces had invaded eastern Poland on the 17th of September 1939 as part of the non-aggression pact signed with Germany, which basically divided the smaller country between its two bigger neighbors. Poland had already been overrun by the German army, which had attacked on the 1st of September, and virtually all resistance had ceased, and when the last serious Polish units, Mazchek's Black Brigade, fighting near Low in the southeast, were ordered to retreat into Hungary, the Red Army could enter the city virtually unopposed. "27th of September 1939. Warsaw surrenders. Warsaw had had the dubious honor of being the first major city to be subject to a German air attack when the country was invaded on the 1st of September 1939. The German armies had been closing in on the Polish capital since the 8th of September from both the north and the south, and the attack by the Soviet Union on the 17th of September made it only a question of time before Poland and Warsaw would finally fall. The garrison in Warsaw did fight bravely, but the Poles were not only outnumbered, but relied largely on outdated equipment, and very little of it. And on the 27th of September, the city finally had to surrender. 5th of October 1939. Poland is finally defeated. The war in Poland had in reality been over for a couple of weeks at least, but there were still pockets of resistance throughout the last days of September and the first week of October 1939. The Germans had crossed the Vistula River on the 5th of September, their panzer had reached Warsaw on the 9th, and Soviet forces had invaded the country on the 17th. On the 22nd of September, the Red Army occupied Lvov in the southeast of the country, and on the 27th, the Polish capital finally had to give in and surrender to the Germans. So by the 5th of October, all resistance in Poland ceased. The country was defeated. 6th of October 1939. Hitler offers peace to West in speech. Though German rearmament had been rapid through the late 1930s, Hitler knew that there was still some way to go before reaching the desired strength. Though the Polish campaign had shown German military superiority, it had been against a reasonably weak country, and Hitler did not want to tackle either France or Great Britain, let alone a combined Allied force at this time, and in a broadcasted speech, he announced that Germany definitely had no further territorial claims in Europe, probably hoping to stave off immediate retaliatory actions, which indeed he did. 30th of November 1939. The Soviet Union attacks Finland. Finland had concluded a non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union as early as 1932, and when the Second World War broke out in 1939, the country declared its neutrality. The USSR was keen to secure the approaches to the old capital, Leningrad, and demanded that Finland cede certain strategically important territories in return for parts of Soviet-controlled Karelia. When the Finns refused, Russian armies invaded Finland on the 30th of November, initiating the Winter War. The Finns, commanded by Mannerheim, fought back and won some surprising and famous victories, but were eventually forced to sue for peace. 13th of December 1939. Graf Spee discovered close to Uruguay's coast. The pocket battleship Graf Spee had sailed into the Atlantic 2 weeks before war broke out, with the aim to wreak havoc among Britain's merchant shipping while evading Royal Navy cruisers. This well-armed Panzerschiffe had sunk the liner Clement off the Brazilian coast, and the French and British had put together 8 separate hunting groups, including a group of 4 ships commanded by Commodore Henry Harwood. Harwood was convinced that the Graf Spee would try and strike the important River Plate trade, and did indeed spot the German ship off the Uruguayan coast on the morning of the 13th of December 1939, and a pursuit that ended in the sinking of the German battleship ensued. 13th of February 1940. Fierce fighting in Karelia. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, Finland declared its neutrality. The Soviet Union, in an effort to secure the approaches to Leningrad, demanded that Finland cede certain territory in exchange for parts of Soviet Karelia. When the Finns refused, Soviet armies invaded the country on the 30th of November 1939, initiating the Winter War, or Russo-Finnish War. The Finns, led by Karl Mannerheim, fought back and won astonishing victories. The fighting became particularly fierce during the middle of February 1940, but superior Soviet forces eventually forced the Finns to sue for peace. 12th of March 1940. Winter War in Finland is over. The Soviet Union had invaded Finland on the 30th of November 1939, initiating the Russo-Finnish War, very much a David and Goliath situation. Initially, the Finns were doing surprisingly well, gaining some astonishing victories. But by early January 1940, Joseph Stalin decided that this war must be brought to an end. Command of the campaign was given to General Timoshenko, and he started a systematic artillery destruction of the main Finnish defenses, the Mannerheim Line. The Finns had no long-range artillery, and by the 12th of March were forced to sue for peace. 13th of March 1940. Russo-Finnish peace treaty signed in Moscow. On the 13th of March 1940, the Finnish Prime Minister Ryti had to journey to Moscow to sign the Treaty of Moscow, accepting his country's defeat in the Russo-Finnish War, popularly known as the Winter War. Finland had given up large tracts of land. The new borders were returned to, more or less, how they had been drawn up by Tsar Peter the Great in 1721, which is, incidentally, where they remain today. In Karelia, the new border was now west of the town of Vuokkori and north of Suomussalmi. In the north, the border was pushed approximately 100 kilometers west. The 8th of April 1940. British mine Norwegian fjords. The German heavy industry was receiving Swedish iron ore through the Norwegian port of Narvik. Though still in the grip of the inactivities of the phony war, the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, announced on the 8th of April 1940 that he had ordered the Royal Navy to lay mines in Norwegian waters in order to stop the traffic. This action was a flagrant violation of Norway's neutrality, which apparently was justified by the British on the curious ground that Germany's reaction would probably be even more flagrant. Although neutral, Norway was friendly towards Britain. This appeared odd to many British people. The 9th of April 1940. Germany invades Denmark, Norway. Adolf Hitler had been concerned that British aid to Finland could interfere with the supply of iron ore from Sweden, partly due to the British Navy's actions in Norwegian waters in February 1940. It was at that point Hitler decided that the invasion of Norway and Denmark should take place on the 9th of April. So, by dawn the day after the British had started to mine the Norwegian fjords, German troops were swarming ashore at Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim, and even Narvik, whilst at the same time, troops had crossed the German-Danish border and landed in Copenhagen. Denmark hardly put up any resistance and was under German control within hours, but the Norwegians did put up a fight. 15th of April 1940. British troops start landing in Narvik. The Germans had attacked Norway on the 9th of April 1940 and had been met with fierce resistance from this small nation, though there was little they could do about the Luftwaffe's air superiority. The Royal Navy offered some resistance as a destroyer strike created chaos among the German warships in Narvik Harbor, and on the 15th of April, British troops started to land at Narvik and other towns in northern Norway. These reinforcements were incorporated piecemeal into the ragged defenses and were beaten by better trained, better armed, and much better coordinated and commanded German troops. The survivors of 2 British brigades were evacuated from Undalsnes by the 1st of May. The 10th of May, 1940. Germany opens Western Front. Britain had declared war on Germany following the invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939, but a period of military inactivity followed, known as the Phony War. At approximately 2:30 in the morning of the 10th of May, 1940, 64 men of the German army crossed the border into Holland, and the Western Front was officially open. 3 hours later, 30 divisions of Army Group B drove forwards from Maastricht towards the coast at the Ems estuary. The main thrust came in the south, where General von Rundstedt's Army Group A did what the Allied had thought impossible, crossed the Ardennes with 44 divisions, and started the famous drive to the coast and Dunkirk. The 12th of May, 1940. The 4th German Army reaches the Meuse River. The wooded country in the Ardennes had been considered impassable for tanks by the French since 1919, but had been penetrated by General Kleist's 7 Panzer divisions as part of Army Group A on the 10th of May, 1940. Now, with a speed that brought tears of joy to Hitler's eyes, the Germans could move forward, and the Meuse River was reached by the 12th of May. It was the Allied defense plan to swing down the British expeditionary forces currently in Belgium, closing the passage from the German border through to the coast. But 2 factors spoiled this plan: the mentioned speed of the German armies and the surprise penetration of the Ardennes forest. 14th of May, 1940. Rotterdam is destroyed. Hermann Göring was in charge of the German military build-up prior to the war and also devised the idea of terror bombing, whereby entire cities were nearly leveled by aerial bombardment, in the belief that this would subjugate their civilian population. On the 14th of May, 1940, scores of Luftwaffe squadrons attacked the important Dutch deep-sea port of Rotterdam. The city was virtually undefended and was almost eradicated from the map, with a level of civilian casualties never seen before. Coinciding with this horrendous event, information came through that German forces in record time had reached the Meuse River. The Dutch army surrendered. 15th of May, 1940. Guderian breaks through at Sedan. The brilliant German Panzer General Heinz Guderian and his Panzer Corps had reached the Meuse River on each side of the town of Sedan by the afternoon of the 12th of May, 1940, and by the evening, German troops controlled the river as far as Denain. The French High Command had estimated that it would take the Germans at least 6 days to cross the river, but Guderian and his panzers were across within 24 hours. By the morning of the 14th of May, Guderian had established 2 bridgeheads. Early on the 15th of May, the flood burst into France from each of the bridgeheads as the panzers roared forward, supported by a cloud of screaming Stukas. The important breakthrough had been achieved. The 16th of May, 1940. Roosevelt asked Congress for 50,000 planes a year. There was little doubt at the outbreak of the Second World War that air supremacy would be vital, and on the 16th of May, 1940, President Roosevelt asked Congress for at least 50,000 aircraft a year, even before Pearl Harbor. Many plants had already stepped up production, not least the Boeing factory, whose B-17, the Flying Fortress, was to play such a significant role both in Europe and in the Pacific. The Boeing technicians developed new work practices and invented shortcuts that increased productivity by some 30%, literally within weeks, and this important bomber was soon shipped in unprecedented numbers. The 17th of May, 1940. Stukas attacked civilians in northern France. The Junker 87, the Stuka, had first seen action with the Condor Legion in Spain and had become an integral part of the Germans' blitzkrieg. On the 17th of May, 1940, the Stuka was deployed tactically against the civilian population in northern France. In order to block major roads and create chaos amongst the retreating Allied troops, selected towns and villages were bombed by the Luftwaffe. When the people fled, Stukas strafed them to force the stream of refugees in a pre-designated direction, and by doing this, the terrified civilians, including women and children, created a human barrier that was difficult, if not impossible, to penetrate. 20th of May 1940. German forces reach Abbeville in western France. After his success at Sedan on the 14th and 15th of May 1940, General Heinz Guderian's panzers were virtually unstoppable. By the evening of the 20th of May, Guderian had reached Abbeville at the mouth of the River Somme, some 230 kilometers west of Sedan, as the crow flies, an amazing achievement. The day after, 4 British infantry brigades and the 1st Army Tank Brigade moved south from Arras, supposedly supported by French forces, but were quickly blocked by Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, and the BEF had to withdraw, eventually to end up on the beaches of Dunkirk. – 24th of May 1940. Hitler stops the German advance towards Dunkirk. The rapid German onslaught in northern France during May 1941 had pushed the British Expeditionary Force and the French troops literally into the sea. On the 24th of May, the beaches around the French port of Dunkirk appeared to be the last stand for more than 330,000 Allied troops as the German divisions were closing in, and the Germans hesitated. In fact, Adolf Hitler himself gave the order to halt the advance. This military faux pas was to cost the Germans dearly later, and military and political analysts are still arguing why the Führer spurned the chance to capture a substantial percentage of the Allies' experienced troops. 27th of May 1940. Evacuation of Dunkirk starts. More than 330,000 troops were isolated on the beaches around Dunkirk and had only so far been saved by Hitler's curious order to halt the German drive to the sea. Operation Dynamo, the attempt to evacuate the British Army and French soldiers from the beaches, started on the 27th of May 1940 and involved more than 1,000 boats, from a Royal Navy anti-aircraft cruiser down to small dinghies sailed across the channel by their owners. The British initially thought that with luck they might be able to rescue some 50,000 men. In the event, miraculously, 338,226 soldiers reached England, invaluable in the fight to come. The 28th of May 1940. Belgium capitulates. On the 28th of May 1940, King Leopold of Belgium signed an armistice with the Germans, and the Belgian army ceased to exist. No longer being able to count on Belgian support, the British Expeditionary Force saw a large gap opening up on their left flank and exposing them to imminent defeat. During the night, this gap was filled by an extraordinarily difficult maneuver, carried out with great efficiency by the 3rd Infantry Division under the command of Major General Bernard Montgomery. This maneuver was largely responsible for protecting the beaches at Dunkirk, and thereby also responsible for saving the BEF. The 29th of May 1940. German troops finally forced out of Narvik in northern Norway. After the German invasion of Norway on the 9th of April 1940, the Norwegians, with some help from British forces, fought bravely, but had to give up in the south and central part of the country on the 1st of May. However, in the north, around the port of Narvik, the situation for General Dietl and his 2,000 German mountain troops was not so favorable. They were under heavy attack from a combined force of British Guardsmen, French chasseurs alpins, and Polish chasseurs du Nord. By the 28th of May, the Allied forces entered the town, and on the 29th, Narvik was firmly in Allied hands. The 4th of June 1940. Evacuation of Dunkirk is completed. The evacuation of Dunkirk is completed on the 4th of June 1940. The German claimed to have taken 40,000 prisoners, but more than 330,000 were landed in England. The British people were elated, but Churchill introduced some caution in a speech which had passages that now form part of British history.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
The 7th of June, 1940. Norwegian king and government leave the country and Norway capitulates. The Germans had invaded Norway on the 9th of April 1940 against surprisingly heavy opposition. But the odds were clearly against the Norwegians, a country with less than 4 million inhabitants and limited defense spendings, against one of the most advanced military nations in the world. And despite British support in the north, the country finally had to capitulate on the 7th of June 1940. However, no treaty was signed between Norway's government or its king and the Germans, and King Haakon VII went into exile in England, from where he led his government in exile until the end of the war. The 9th of June 1940. The Germans' drive into France picks up speed. After the fall of Dunkirk, the German armies started their drive for the Seine on the 5th of June 1940. 5 armored corps, 3 under General Bock and 2 commanded by General Rundstedt, were supported by clouds of dive bombers. On the 9th of June, Hitler announced, "The second great offensive is starting today with formidable new resources," and surprisingly, the Germans really could use all their resources, as the French made a determined stand on the route to the Seine and Paris. But however courageous the French stand was, in reality it only delayed the Germans for a few hours, and by the 11th of June they were in control of the Seine from Le Havre to Vernon. The 10th of June 1940. Mussolini attacks southern France. On the 10th of June 1940, Italy declares war on Great Britain and France. Mussolini now decided to contribute his bit to the Pact of Steel's war effort and attacked across the French-Italian border with the aim of capturing Nice before the Germans got there. Not surprisingly, Mussolini did not achieve his military goal and did not even find out if he could have done so. First, it had taken through to the 20th of June to get across the border, and then, on the 22nd, armistice had been signed with the Germans, and the limit of the occupation agreed, and this did not include Provence. The 12th of June 1940, Churchill flies to France. The French Commander-in-Chief Weygand declared on the 9th of June 1940 that "Our armies are fighting the last possible defensive battle. If this fails, they are doomed to rapid destruction." Churchill flies to France on the 12th of June to personally assess the situation. He meets with General Weygand, supported by Marshal Pétain, and with a guarded Brigadier de Gaulle in attendance. De Gaulle later stated that he thought that these discussions were only so much chatter and that the only option open was recovery across the sea. Such a suggestion was indignantly rejected by Weygand, who later claimed, "I would never agree to inflicting such a shame on our flag." The 16th of June 1940. Paul Reynaud resigns as he refuses to capitulate. The French Commander-in-Chief, General Weygand, claimed that there was no way he would accept that French soldiers would leave France and fight alongside British and Americans in the struggle ahead. He even went as far as stating that such action would be the ultimate crime, doing untold damage to the nation's military honor. It is then difficult to understand why only 8 days after this declaration he ordered the remaining French army formations around the Maginot Line, some 400,000 troops, to ask for armistice. This attitude sat very badly with the French Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud, who refused to capitulate and consequently resigned on the 16th of June 1940. The 17th of June 1940. Marshal Pétain asked for armistice. Prime Minister Paul Reynaud's resignation on the 16th of June 1940 had left the road clear for Marshal Philippe Pétain, who now took over as unelected Prime Minister. The next day, on the 17th of June, Pétain began negotiations with the Germans for an armistice that didn't involve the total loss of France to German occupying forces. It was eventually agreed that the Germans would occupy France to the north of the Loire River, and all along the Atlantic coast down to the Spanish border. This meant that 55% of French national territory, including Paris, was occupied, but that a French state still existed and still ruled over its colonial empire. The 22nd of June 1940. Surrender signed between Germany and France in Compiègne. Marshal Philippe Pétain had taken over from Paul Reynaud as Prime Minister of France on the 16th of June 1940, when the latter resigned as he refused to sue for peace with the Germans. Pétain had immediately negotiated a settlement that by many French was considered shameful and would set up government in Vichy. The official peace agreement, or surrender, was signed on the 22nd of June. The Germans insisted that the signing took place in the very same railway carriage in Compiègne where the armistice had been signed in 1918 at the conclusion of the First World War. Hitler was literally dancing with joy. The 24th of June 1940. Ceasefire agreement is signed between the French and the Italians. Mussolini's Italy had declared war on Great Britain and France on the 10th of June 1940, and Italian troops had moved towards the French-Italian frontier. While the Germans were driving south towards the Seine and Paris, Mussolini had hoped that his forces would be able to capture Provence and establish an Italian stronghold in Nice. This was not to be, as Pétain sued for peace and managed to negotiate a settlement that left the southern part of France under a French government. As a junior partner in the Pact of Steel, Mussolini had no option but to agree an end to hostilities, and on the 24th of June the ceasefire agreement between France and Italy was signed. The 30th of June 1940. Germans occupy the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands, Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, and Sark, were of absolutely no strategical importance, except that they potentially could give English forces, commandos, or individuals easy access to France and mainland Europe. The Germans decided to occupy the islands and invaded Jersey and Guernsey on the 30th of June 1940 against absolutely no opposition, bar some token resistance. Actually, the island barely had even a police force under normal circumstances. The Channel Islands were the only sovereign British territory the German held throughout the entire war, but they did hang on until May 1945. The 11th of July 1940. Marshal Pétain assumes title as Chief of French State. Marshal Pétain, now Prime Minister of the unoccupied part of France, had negotiated an armistice with the German invaders that for many French was more than shameful. The hero of Verdun was now 84 years old, and however misguided, there are few that doubted his sincerity when full power as Chief of State was bestowed on him on the 10th of July 1940. The following day, the 11th of July, saw the new French government established in the town of Vichy. Pétain had virtual dictatorial powers, and he and his Prime Minister, Pierre Laval, established a fascist-orientated administration that eventually even the Germans didn't trust. 19th of July 1940. Hitler repeats his peace offer of the previous year to the West. The swift German victories in France in 1940 had astonished the whole world, including Hitler and his staff. Not for a moment had they dreamed that within a month of opening their campaign, they would be discussing the problems of an invasion across the English Channel. It had been argued that the lack of concrete invasion plans were due to Hitler's reluctance to wage war against England, a claim supported by his broadcast to the world, made on the 19th of July when he made a formal peace offer. When the offer was rejected by Winston Churchill on the 22nd of July, Hitler finally went ahead and demanded a plan for an invasion. The 18th of August, 1940. RAF destroys 71 German aircraft, losing 27 themselves. Hermann Göring had rather optimistically stated that his Luftwaffe could defeat England, thus making way for an easy and trouble-free invasion. After the initial early attacks on shipping in the English Channel, the second phase of the Battle of Britain began on the 11th of August, 1940, when German bombers attacked fighter command airfields and radar stations around London. But the RAF fought back quite successfully, and German losses were mounting disproportionately to British losses. The raid mounted on the 18th of August saw 71 German aircraft shot down, whilst the RAF only lost 27. 21st of August, 1940. Trotsky is assassinated in Mexico City. In the years just after the Russian Revolution, Leon Trotsky was second only to Lenin, whom he backed on major policy issues in the Politburo. So when Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Stalin took power, Trotsky formed a left opposition, but was first exiled to Central Asia in 1928 and then expelled from the USSR the year after. Trotsky sought refuge in Turkey, France, Norway, and finally Mexico, where he continued his fierce critiques of the Stalinist regime. A Stalinist agent fatally wounded him with an ice pick in Coyoacan, Mexico, on the 20th of August 1940, and he died the following day. 27th of August 1940. Luftwaffe intensifies its operations against England. The RAF had bombed Berlin on the 25th of August in retaliation of German bombs offloaded over London 2 days earlier by a Luftwaffe pilot en route to the Midlands. Hermann Göring had bragged to Hitler that this would never happen, as the RAF surely was on its last leg. Hitler decided that the time had come to test the morale of the British people, and he ordered the Luftwaffe attack to be switched from RAF stations to British cities. Thus began the Blitz that was to cost the life of thousands of civilians and massive destruction, but which only managed to create defiance and determination in the people.
Well, I'm on the safe side, aren't I?
13th of September 1940. Italian General Gracchiani finally moves in North Africa. The Italian forces in Cyrenaica in North Africa were commanded by Marshal D'Amarta Rodolfo Gracchiani, locally known as the Butcher because of his treatment of the Senussi tribe. When the war began and Gracchiani potentially faced weapons heavier than old rifles, he pleaded eloquently in person and by letter for a policy of total inactivity throughout his command in Libya. In the end, Mussolini's patience ran out and issued a direct order to the reluctant commander, and 5 divisions of the Italian 10th Army crossed the border into Egypt. Suffice to say that the Italian forces did not cover themselves with glory. 3rd of October 1940. Chamberlain resigns from cabinet. Arthur Neville Chamberlain was born in 1869 and had been elected to Parliament in 1918. He served as Postmaster General, Minister of Health, and Chancellor before succeeding Baldwin as Prime Minister in 1937. Chamberlain's appeasement policies had culminated in the ill-fated Munich Pact with Germany, and he was forced to resign in May 1940 at the end of the Phoney War. From then, he served in Churchill's cabinet as Lord President of the Council until 3rd of October 1940, when ill health forced him to resign. Neville Chamberlain died the following month. 4th of October 1940. Hitler and Mussolini meet at the Brenner Pass. Since the beginning of the war in Europe, Mussolini had taken to consulting Hitler upon his thoughts and ambitions for the future, but Hitler rarely reciprocated. When the Führer and Il Duce met at the Brenner Pass on the 4th of October 1940, Germany had, to all intents and purposes, occupied Romania. But Hitler did not inform Mussolini about this detail, and the Italian leader did not hear about it until a few days later. Mussolini was not happy of this lack of trust, as he saw it, and was known to vent his fury when with his officials. But in reality, there was little he could do. He was clearly the junior partner. 7th of October 1940, Hell's Corner. The Battle of Britain was fought in the skies above a large part of southern England, but one narrow corridor stretching from Dover and northwest towards London was particularly busy and became known as Hell's Corner. Trying to stop the German bombers reaching the capital, this was where British fighter commands Hurricanes and Spitfires met the enemy, and dogfights with the German fighter escorts, mainly Messerschmitt 109s, were almost continuous during daylight hours. Though the RAF incurred heavy casualties, it was the British that were in the ascendancy and caused sufficient damage to German bomber and fighter squadrons for them largely to abandon daylight missions. The Germans were losing the Battle of Britain. The 16th of October 1940, RAF bomb Kiel. Blitz was the systematic bombing by the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, of predominantly civilian targets in England from the autumn of 1940 through to early 1941. During that period, more than 40,000 British civilians were killed and 50,000 injured in attacks on Coventry, Southampton, Cardiff, Swansea, Liverpool, Bristol, Plymouth, and London, amongst others. RAF resources were stretched, but it was both tactically and morally important to retaliate, and by October they had started to mount raids against German targets. On the 16th, the attack on the naval base in Kiel in northern Germany was one of the RAF's successes. 28th of October 1940, Italian troops crossed the Albanian-Greek border. Mussolini found it difficult to see himself as a junior partner to Adolf Hitler within the Treaty of Steel. When German forces entered Romania, Il Duce furiously ignored Hitler's warning about starting an offensive in the Balkans, screaming at Marshal Badoglio, "Did they tell us about the campaign in Norway or the offensive on the Western Front? They behave as if we do not exist. I shall repay them in their own coin." And this he did. During the morning of 28th of October, Italian forces crossed the border into Greece in the mountainous Pindus region and started a less than successful campaign that eventually required the intervention by the Germans. 29th of October 1940. British troops sail from Egypt for Crete. The Greek island of Crete dominated the sea routes to the eastern Mediterranean and was within easy flying range of bases in North Africa. The Italian invasion of Greece on the 28th of October 1940 naturally made Crete a target for eventual Axis control, and on the 29th of October, a British force set sail for the island in order to create a base for possible future operations in the Balkans. The Allied garrison, established and commanded by General Freyberg, had a reasonably peaceful time until April-May the following year, when British forces in Greece were evacuated to the island, leading directly to the German attack that started on the morning of May 20th. 31st of October 1940. King and Queen inspect damage during the Blitz. King George VI, who had succeeded his brother, Edward VIII, after the latter's abdication, had become a popular, if self-effacing monarch. The King and Queen Elizabeth ignored contingency plans for their evacuation to Canada and remained in Britain throughout the war. During the Blitz, the royal couple undoubtedly boosted public morale by their continuous visits to military units and to war-torn cities. On the 31st of October 1940, during the height of the Battle of Britain, the King and Queen inspected the damage that German bombing raids had made to the capital, an action very much appreciated by the local population. 9th of November 1940, Neville Chamberlain dies. Arthur Neville Chamberlain, born in 1869, was the son of Joseph Chamberlain and half-brother of Sir Austen. After a successful business career and a spell as Lord Mayor of Birmingham, he became Member of Parliament in 1918. He succeeded Stanley Baldwin as Prime Minister in 1937. Chamberlain's main aim as Prime Minister was to avoid a European war at all costs, and his policy of appeasement towards Hitler culminated in the Munich Pact of September 1938. After the blatant failure of the pact and a few months of war, Chamberlain was forced to resign in May 1940, and he died on the 9th of November. 14th of November 1940, Germans bomb Coventry. The fortunes of war during the Battle of Britain was by November 1940 favoring the RAF, and the German High Command, including Hitler and Göring, agreed to step up bombing of non-military targets in an effort to demoralize the population. The raid on Coventry on the 14th of November 1940 could be argued to also have a military objective, as the city was a manufacturing center for armaments and munitions. The attack, codenamed Moonlight Sonata, was made by 449 Luftwaffe bombers and left much of the city destroyed, including the historic cathedral, and accounted for casualties of more than 1,000 dead or severely wounded. 8th of December 1940. Incendiary attack on London. The Battle of Britain was not going well for Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe. Several different tactics had been deployed without much success. Even the shift to civilian targets for the German bombers had only resulted in hardening British determination. On the 8th of December 1940, the Germans tried yet another ploy when they attacked London with incendiary bombs, aiming to cause as much material damage to the city as possible. The raid was even timed to coincide with the lowest tide of the River Thames for months, thereby making the subsequent firefighting more difficult. The damage to London was significant, but the RAF had in reality turned the tide, and the air war over England was already lost by the Germans. 17th of December 1940. British take Sollum. The Italian forces in North Africa, commanded by Marshal Graziani, had finally been forced to advance into Egypt by Mussolini in September 1940. The Italians had been stopped at Sidi Barrani on the coast, and the British commander, General O'Connor, mounted his counter-offensive on the 9th of December. This action had succeeded beyond the Allies' wildest dreams, and by the 10th of December, their biggest problem in the desert was how to cope with 20,000 Axis POWs. This was an opportunity for the British to exploit, and they continued their drive and took and occupied the town of Sollum some 80 kilometers further west on the 17th of December. 18th of December 1940. Hitler's Directive 21 is issued. The German-Soviet non-aggression treaty, signed by the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop and his Soviet counterpart Molotov notwithstanding, Hitler had been planning an attack on the Soviet Union for some time. On the 18th of December 1940, the Führer issued a secret memorandum on Fall Barbarossa, the code name for the projected invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the original plan to launch the attack in May 1941, thereby giving the German forces ample time to reach Moscow before the onset of winter. In fact, the invasion did not start until the 22nd of June, a delay that would prove fatal for the Germans on the Eastern Front.